Hello, my name is Byron Minson, and I am here to talk about my research project that centers on the ecological comparison between urban and rural American crow habitats, as well as the future of where this research project is going. So, as I mentioned, my name is Byron Minson. I am currently a junior in the biology major, and I've been working with Dr. Poley since I was a freshman to design my own research project. So while this is in no means finished, I wanted to share what I've discovered so far, as well as where I see this project going and the possible research questions that have been opened up from the research I've done so far. Just as a little bit of background, I kind of wanted to talk about crows and what this project really is first. So I would say that most everyone is familiar with what an American crow is. They're extremely abundant in all areas of the US. You can find them from the tips of the Pacific Northwest to the bottoms of the Southeast. So they're very abundant in America. And they're especially interesting because they can thrive in urban, suburban, and rural areas. They're extremely adaptable, so they are able to survive whether there's absolutely no people around and it's just a bunch of trees and other organisms, or whether it's a huge city like New York where there's only concrete and no vegetation in sight. So, as I mentioned, they can survive in pretty much every type of habitat. However, for a long time, they tended to prefer rural habitats. After all, we have something called a scarecrow because they were such a pest and a nuisance to farmers that they had to come up with a method to stop them from eating their crops. So, in recent years, this has actually changed because crows, instead of staying in these rural environments, have been migrating more and more to live permanently in suburban and urban areas. There is an extreme increase in population size in urban environments that is never before seen. So we kind of wanted to look at the effects of urbanization on the American crow because it's a very fascinating topic of study because, as I mentioned, American crows are one of the species that have been able to adapt to these, I would say extreme environments that come with cities, whereas other species have, decreased in number and are even going extinct. Understanding the relationship between American crow populations and urbanization can be extremely important because as these crow populations are increasing in areas where human populations are also increasing and in vast abundance, they're bringing diseases like West Nile virus that can harm humans, as well as providing very beneficial treatments such as forest renewal in these cities where there isn't a lot of natural vegetation. It can also be a useful tool for looking at conservation efforts of animals that may not have adapted as well to changing habitats. So, by looking at how the American crow is doing it, we can look at another species and possibly try and help them. So, now I just kind of wanted to talk about what I've done and my results for a little bit. So, we picked out areas of study that kind of represented this urban and rural dichotomy. So for urban, we found Richmond to be a great location that's close by. And for rural, we kind of chose the Salem Roanoke area because even though there certainly are suburban and even, Roanoke City is kind of pretty urban, that it is still largely rural. If you look at these two images down below, you can really see the difference. So for example, Richmond, which is A, you can see lots of highways, lots of roads. You can even make out some of the buildings and amount of impervious structures that exist in this area. When you look at Roanoke, although there are certainly highways and roads and even a little bit of city in the middle, it is largely undeveloped land and just vast woodlands. So that's how we kind of determined the two sites. And so we found hubs where crows have been known to be seen, and then built an area around these, and then looked at the ecological traits of each of these areas to see how they differed and how we could create a research question based on these two areas. So I'm just going to point you to the significant differences that we found, which were determined just subjectively through prior knowledge of what impacts crows. So firstly, and I think kind of obviously, the population is pretty significant because although Roanoke certainly does have a substantial population, it's much smaller compared to Richmond. The altitude is also a significant difference because crows tend to prefer lower altitudes. The forest type is also pretty significant because even though oak chestnut and oak pine might not seem too different, these forest types determine what other species are going to be allowed to live there. And for the crow specifically, it's going to determine what kind of food sources are available. So then for the second table, we wanted to look more broadly at the general regions to find this information. So the first thing is the percent deciduous hardwoods and percent mixed evergreen. This is the forest type makeup. So these are significant because crows tend to prefer evergreen trees to nest in. So as the Piedmont region tends to have more evergreen forests, this might make an impact, as well as the deciduous hardwoods percentage. So then we looked at percent unfragmented natural lands and percent public lands. And these really show us what percent is developed, even though that specific number doesn't seem to be a significant difference. And you know what types of land exist. So as you can see, there's much more unfragmented natural lands in the Piedmont region, whereas there's more public lands in the Blue Ridge Mountain. And although we don't know the exact impacts that these specific percentages could have right now, they certainly offer a great jumping off point for what is going to be my final talking point, which is the future research. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this is just the start to my research project, and this was kind of the background information. So while I've been working on it for quite some time, this is, I still have a lot of goals of where I want to take it. So based on these results that I found during this portion of my research, there are several different hypotheses that I could use as the research question that I further explore. So for the first one, I would suspect that foraging behavior between the two areas would be extremely different because, as I mentioned, the forest types determine that there are going to be different types of vegetation present, as well as understanding that the Richmond area is going to have much more urbanization. There are going to be less natural environments that the crows can use to forage for things such as nuts or insects, and they're going to be choosing much more like man-made type options such as going to the trash. So I would suggest that there is a significant difference between foraging tree preference based on these forest type and also forest makeup differences between the two areas. Also, stemming off of this, my second possible research question could be nest site selection. So, as I mentioned, crows tend to prefer evergreen trees to nest in. However, in the Blue Ridge area, there is not as much of a percentage of evergreen trees. So, nest site selection could certainly be impacted between these two areas. And I would suggest that there would be a difference between them. So finally, my last research question that I could possibly choose revolves around group size. So crows are extremely sociable animals, and they live in these families. However, the group sizes can differ between urban, rural, and suburban areas. One previous study found that rural environments tend to have smaller group sizes, as in smaller than 5, whereas suburban areas would have much larger group sizes. So while research hasn't technically been done between urban and rural environments regarding group size, I would suspect a similar pattern where urban environments had larger group sizes than rural group sizes. And with that, that concludes my presentation on my project surrounding the ecological comparison of urban and rural American crow habitats, as well as the future of where I see this project going. Again, my name is Byron Minson, and thank you so much for listening to my presentation. Have a great rest of your day.